Welcome back to Animal Soul. I am Alexander Simon, and this is the story of how a cat changed our understanding of life, death, and what exists between the two. At 3:33 am on a rainy Tuesday morning in September 1987, Dr. Emily Watson was awakened by a sound she would never forget. It wasn't the common meow of her cat Shadows. It was a low, guttural growl, filled with primitive rage that she had never heard come from the throat of a domestic feline. Emily opened her eyes in the darkness of her San Francisco apartment and saw Shadows, a long-haired black cat she had rescued 3 years earlier, standing rigid in the corner of the room, with his fur raised in a perfect ridge along his spine. His pupils were dilated to the maximum, transforming his eyes into two black holes. He was growling at an empty chair in the corner of the room. "Shadows, what's wrong?" Emily whispered, turning on the bedside lamp. The cat didn't respond. Didn't move. He remained in attack position, muscles tense, continuously growling at something Emily couldn't see. The chair was empty. The corner was empty. But Shadows was reacting to something that was there in the room with them. Then Emily felt it. An inexplicable chill, as if someone had opened a window in the middle of winter. The air became dense, charged, like before an electrical storm. And for a moment, just a moment, she swore she saw a shadow move through the empty chair. Shadows growled one last time, then ran under the bed, where he remained hidden until dawn. The next day, Emily discovered that her apartment neighbor, Mrs. Chun, a 72-year-old lady who lived alone in 4B, had died during the night. The estimated time of death? 3:33 am. Shadows had seen Mrs. Chun depart. He had seen something that Emily, with all her years of medical education and scientific training, couldn't perceive. Today, for the next, you'll discover that cats not only see the invisible, they are the ancestral guardians of the border between worlds. And Dr. Emily Watson was about to become the bridge between modern medicine and feline wisdom that has existed for millennia. Welcome back to Animal Soul. To understand the extraordinary story of Dr. Emily Watson and her cat Shadows, we must first dive into the science behind feline sensory capabilities. What we will discover will challenge everything we think we know about the limits of animal perception. Domestic cats are direct descendants of the African wildcat, Felis libica, which was domesticated approximately 9,000 years ago in the Middle East. But unlike dogs, which were selectively bred by humans to develop specific characteristics, cats domesticated themselves. They chose to live with us, keeping their ancestral predatory abilities practically intact. And these abilities are extraordinary. First, let's talk about vision. A cat's eyes contain 6 to 8 times more rod cells than human eyes. Rods are photoreceptors specialized in detecting light in low-light conditions. This means cats can see clearly with just 1/6 of the light we need. But there's something more fascinating. Cats possess a structure called the tapetum lucidum, a reflective layer behind the retina that acts like a mirror, reflecting light back through the photoreceptors. This is what makes cats' eyes shine in the dark. But the tapetum lucidum doesn't just amplify visible light. It also makes cats sensitive to light frequencies that are completely invisible to us. Dr. Ron Douglas, from City University of London, spent 2 decades studying feline vision. In 2014, his team made a surprising discovery. Cats can see ultraviolet light. They can detect frequencies between 315 to 400 nanometers, a spectrum completely invisible to humans. The world that a cat sees, explains Dr. Douglas, is fundamentally different from ours. They are observing patterns, movements, and luminous phenomena that simply don't exist in our visual reality. Now consider the implications of this. If cats can see light frequencies that we cannot, what else might they be seeing? If there are forms of energy or manifestations that operate in spectrums invisible to us, cats would be the first to detect them. But vision is just the beginning. The feline auditory system is even more extraordinary. Cats can hear frequencies up to 64,000 Hz, almost 2 octaves above the human limit. 20,000 Hz. They can detect sounds as soft as 5 decibels. Compared to the 25 decibels required for human hearing, Professor Dennis Turner, from the University of Zurich and director of the Institute for Applied Ethology and Animal Psychology, discovered that cats use this hypersensitive hearing to detect environmental changes imperceptible to humans. Cats can hear changes in atmospheric pressure, minimal seismic vibrations, even changes in Earth's electromagnetic field, explains Turner. In 2011, researchers from the University of Tokyo documented cats reacting to earthquakes 3 to 5 minutes before seismic instruments detected any activity. The cats were not responding to tremors. They were responding to infrasonic sounds produced by tectonic plate movement, sounds completely inaudible to humans, but perhaps the most mysterious sensory capability of cats is something science is only beginning to understand. Their sensitivity to electromagnetic fields. Dr. Joe Kirschvink, from the California Institute of Technology, a pioneer in magnetoreception research in animals, discovered that cats possess specialized cells containing magnetite, a magnetic mineral, in their noses and brains. These cells function as biological compasses, allowing cats to detect subtle changes in Earth's magnetic field. Cats are essentially living in a world of invisible magnetic maps, explains Kirschvink. They can detect electromagnetic disturbances that we don't even know exist. Now here's where science meets mystery. If cats can see ultraviolet light, hear infrasound, and detect electromagnetic fields, could they also perceive other forms of energy that we haven't yet scientifically identified? Some cultures have always known this. In ancient Egypt, cats were revered as guardians of the underworld. The goddess Bastet, with a cat's head, protected the living from evil spirits and guided souls of the dead to the afterlife. Egyptian temples kept sacred cats specifically to detect spiritual presences. In Celtic tradition, cats were known as cat squeath, fairy cats that could travel between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Black cats especially were believed to possess the ability to see spirits and alert humans to supernatural activity. In Japan, the legend of Nikomata speaks of cats that live so long they develop supernatural powers, including the ability to communicate with the dead and predict the future. Even in modern European folklore, cats are associated with witches and magic precisely because they were observed reacting to phenomena invisible to humans. Could these ancestral traditions have been trying to explain, in mythical language, sensory capabilities that modern science is only beginning to document? Dr. Emily Watson was about to find out. Dr. Emily Watson had become a psychiatrist by accident. Graduated from UCSF Medical School in 1979. She had planned to specialize in cardiology when, during her residency, she was assigned to a 3-month rotation at Pacific State Hospital, a psychiatric institution in San Francisco that treated patients with severe mental disorders. It was there that Emily encountered something that changed her career forever. Patients who reported seeing visitors that no one else could perceive. Dr. Watson, said Margaret Holloway, a 34-year-old patient with paranoid schizophrenia, you need to understand that I'm not hallucinating. There's a difference between the voices in my head and the people who come visit me at night. The voices are diffuse, confusing. But the visitors are clear, specific. And they're not alone. What do you mean by not alone? Asked Emily, taking careful notes. There's always a cat with them, a black cat, and the cat sees me. The visitors sometimes don't even notice I'm here, but the cat always sees me. Emily initially dismissed this as part of Margaret's delusions. But when other patients who had never spoken to each other, began reporting the same pattern, visitors accompanied by a black cat, she began to pay attention. Pacific State Hospital had been built in 1922 on the site of an old cemetery. During construction, Over 200 bodies were exhumed and transferred, but historical records suggested that some graves were never found. At least 30 people could still be buried under the hospital's foundations. Emily began meticulously documenting her patients' reports. In 6 months, she had collected testimonies from 47 different patients, all describing encounters with visitors accompanied by the same black cat. Even more intriguing, the encounters followed specific geographical patterns. Patients in the West Wing reported Victorian-era visitors, men in top hats, women in long dresses. Patients in the East Wing described people in clothing from the 1890s, 1900s. Patients on the ground floor reported encounters with individuals dressed as workers or immigrants. Emily investigated the historical records of the original cemetery. She discovered that the West Wing had been built over the section of the cemetery reserved for prominent Victorian-era families. The East Wing over graves dated 1890 to 1900. Ground floor over an area that had been used to bury poor workers and immigrants. Her patients' reports corresponded exactly to the historical demographics of each cemetery section. This was impossible, Emily wrote in her personal diary. My patients had no access to historical records. Many could barely read. How could they know specific details about people buried 60 to 80 years before they were born? It was during this investigation that Emily adopted shadows. In March 1984, Emily was working late at the hospital when she heard desperate meowing coming from the parking lot. She found a black kitten, perhaps 8 weeks old, trapped in a storm drain. The animal was malnourished, frightened, but when Emily rescued him, he snuggled against her as if he had known her for years. I'll call you Shadows, Emily decided, because you appeared from the shadows when I most needed company. Emily took Shadows home, but discovered something unusual. The cat seemed obsessed with Pacific State Hospital. Whenever she went to work, Shadows tried to follow her. When she came home, the cat would smell her intensively, as if detecting something specific on her clothes. After a few months, Emily began bringing Shadows to work, keeping him in her office. It was then that she discovered the truly extraordinary nature of her cat. Shadows reacted to certain areas of the hospital in ways that made no sense. He completely refused to enter the West Wing, arching his back and hissing whenever Emily tried to take him there. In the East Wing, he walked cautiously, frequently stopping to stare at empty corners, as if he were observing something Emily couldn't see. But it was on the ground floor that Shadow's behavior became truly bewildering. Every Thursday at exactly 2:30 p.m., Shadows would leave Emily's office and walk to the end of the main corridor. There, he would sit and stare fixedly at a specific wall for exactly 15 minutes. Then, he would calmly return to the office. Emily timed this behavior for 3 months. Shadows never varied. Every Thursday, 2:30 p.m., 15 minutes observing the same wall. Intrigued, Emily investigated this specific area. She discovered that, according to original cemetery maps, that wall had been built directly over a grave marked only as J. Morrison, deceased 2:30 p.m., Thursday, April 23, 1903. Shadows was visiting a grave every week at the exact time of death of the person buried there. Emily began accompanying Shadows during his vigils. It was during one of these sessions that she had her first direct experience with the supernatural. It was Thursday, June 7, 1984. Emily was sitting in the corridor, watching Shadows perform his weekly ritual when she felt a change in the atmosphere. The air became colder, denser. Shadows began to purr, a low purr, different from any sound Emily had heard him make. Then she saw a translucent figure of an elderly man, wearing work clothes from the early 1900s, was standing beside Shadows. The man was petting the cat, who purred even louder, rubbing against the apparition's legs. Emily blinked and the figure disappeared. But Shadows continued purring and rubbing against the empty air for a few more minutes. That night, Emily made a decision that would change her professional life forever. She decided to systematically document shadows, reactions in the hospital, and correlate them with her patients' reports. In the following months, Emily discovered extraordinary patterns. Areas where shadows showed discomfort corresponded exactly to locations where patients reported disturbing or malevolent visitors. Areas where shadows seemed calm and even affectionate corresponded to reports of benevolent or familiar visitors. Even more impressive, shadows seemed to predict events in the hospital. When a patient was about to have a psychotic crisis, shadows would position himself outside the person's room hours before symptoms appeared. When someone was about to die, shadows would appear in the infirmary and remain with the person until their final moments. In September 1985, shadows saved Emily's life. Emily was working alone in the hospital on a Friday night when shadows began acting strangely. The cat ran to her, grabbed her pants with his claws, and began pulling her toward the exit. "Shadows, what's wrong?" Emily asked, trying to return to her desk. Shadows meowed loudly, a desperate, urgent meow, and continued pulling Emily toward the door. Something in the cat's behavior alarmed her enough that she decided to listen to him. 5 minutes after, Emily and Shadows left the building. An electrical short circuit caused a fire in the hospital's ventilation system. Emily's office was one of the first to be filled with toxic smoke. If she had remained there, she could have died from smoke. Inhalation. It was that night that Emily fully understood. Shadows wasn't just a cat, he was a guardian. After the fire at Pacific State Hospital in September 1985, Dr. Emily Watson made a decision that would challenge her scientific career. She would systematically study shadows' extraordinary capabilities. Emily knew she needed to approach this with scientific rigor if she wanted anyone to take her findings seriously. She began collaborating with Dr. Marcus Reed, a parapsychologist from Stanford University, and Dr. Sarah Chun, an animal behavior specialist from UC Berkeley. Together, they developed a series of controlled experiments to test shadows' abilities in a way that could be documented and replicated. The first experiment was simple: presence detection testing. Emily, Dr. Reed, and Dr. Chun divided the hospital into 50 sections. In each section, they meticulously recorded Shadow's behavior, where he felt comfortable, where he showed anxiety, where he seemed to be interacting with something invisible. Simultaneously, they interviewed all 89 hospital patients about their experiences with visitors or unusual phenomena. No patient knew about the other tests being conducted. When they compiled the data, the results were statistically impossible to explain by coincidence. Shadow's reactions corresponded to patient reports in 94% of cases, a correlation that Dr. Reed described as scientifically extraordinary. In 30 years studying paranormal phenomena, wrote Dr. Reed in his report, "I have never documented such a consistent correlation between animal behavior and human reports of anomalous activity." The second experiment was more ambitious. They brought shadows to locations outside the hospital, places with documented histories of paranormal activity. The first test was at the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose, a Victorian mansion famous for its bizarre construction and haunting reports. Sarah Winchester, heiress to the Winchester fortune, had built the house with stairs that led nowhere, doors that opened to walls, and corridors that ended abruptly, all allegedly to confuse vengeful spirits. Shadows was brought to the mansion. Without any preparation or prior information, Dr. Chun and her team simply observed and documented his reactions. The results were remarkable. Shadows navigated through the house as if he knew its layout intimately. More impressive, he systematically avoided all the architectural traps that Sarah Winchester had built to confuse spirits. He never tried to climb stairs that led nowhere. He never approached doors that opened to walls. In one specific room, the bedroom where Sarah Winchester had died, Shadows behaved in a way that left all researchers perplexed. He entered the room, walked directly to a specific corner, and began purring. Then he lay down in that exact spot and remained there for 45 minutes, apparently interacting with something no one else could see. Emily discovered later that that specific corner was where Sarah Winchester used to sit every night to talk with spirits about how to continue building the house. The third experiment was the most controlled of all. Dr. Reed gained access to Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, an abandoned prison known for intense paranormal activity. The experiment would be double-blind. Neither Emily nor Shadows would know the history of specific areas of the prison. Dr. Reed and a team of historians divided the prison into 30 sections. For each section, they had detailed historical documentation: which cells had been the scene of suicides, homicides or natural deaths where torture had occurred, which areas had histories of paranormal activity reported by visitors. Emily and Shadows were led through the prison by a guide who knew nothing about the experiment. Emily simply observed and recorded Shadows' behavior in each area. The results were statistically impossible to ignore. Shadows showed extreme distress in 100% of areas where violent deaths had occurred. In cells where prisoners had committed suicide, Shadows completely refused to enter. In areas where torture had happened, he arched his back and hissed. But most extraordinary, in 3 specific cells where prisoners had died of natural causes, illness or old age, Shadows entered calmly and behaved affectionately, as if he were interacting with benevolent presences. Shadows is reacting to information that is not available through any known sense, concluded Dr. Chun in her report. He is detecting something, residual energy, psychic impressions. We don't know what to call it, that leaves lasting marks in places where emotionally intense events occurred. The fourth experiment was the most personal and disturbing. Dr. Reed had developed a theory. If Shadows could detect impressions left by past deaths and traumas, perhaps he could also detect the approach of death in living people. To test this, they began observing Shadows at Pacific State Hospital when terminal patients were admitted. The hospital occasionally received psychiatric patients who were also in final stages of physical illnesses. During an 8-month period, Emily documented Shadows' behavior regarding 23 terminal patients. The results were simultaneously fascinating and haunting. Shadows consistently appeared in terminal patients' rooms 24 to 48 hours before their deaths. He positioned himself near the person's bed, not intrusively, but like a silent guardian. Patients who were conscious frequently reported feeling comforted by the cat's presence. The most extraordinary case was Robert Martinez, a 67-year-old man with severe dementia and terminal cancer. Robert had been catatonic for 3 weeks when Shadows appeared in his room on a Monday morning. Emily was making her medical rounds when she found Shadows lying on the bed next to Robert, purring softly. What shocked her was that Robert, who hadn't spoken or responded to stimuli for weeks, was petting Shadows and whispering inaudible words. "Mr. Martinez?" Emily approached carefully. "How are you feeling?" Robert looked at Emily with clarity she hadn't seen in his eyes for months. "The cat," he said with a hoarse but clear voice. "The cat is helping me find my wife." Robert had lost his wife 2 years earlier. In his demential condition, he frequently asked for her, unable to understand that she had died. "She's here," Robert continued, still petting Shadows. "Maria is here. The cat brought her to get me." Robert died peacefully 18 hours later, with Shadows at his side. Nurses reported that he remained calm and apparently pain-free until his final moments, something rare for patients with his type of terminal cancer. Shadows is not just detecting the approach of death, Emily wrote in her notes. He's serving as some kind of psychopomp, a guide between worlds, helping people in the transition from life to death. The fifth and final experiment was the most scientific and perhaps the most conclusive. Dr. Reed had gained access to state-of-the-art electromagnetic detection equipment from the Stanford Research Institute. The theory was simple. if shadows was detecting some type of energy or field that humans couldn't perceive, perhaps these instruments could detect environmental changes correlated with his behavior. They spent 6 months at Pacific State Hospital with equipment that measured electromagnetic fields, infrasound, background radiation, and other environmental variables. Whenever shadows showed unusual behavior, they recorded detailed readings from all instruments. The results were extraordinary. In 89% of cases where shadows showed signs of interaction with invisible presences, the instruments detected specific electromagnetic anomalies. There were consistent patterns, specific frequencies between 0.1 to 0.5 Hz, infrasound, fluctuations in the local magnetic field of 2 to 5 nanoteslas, and variations in background radiation of up to 15%. We are documenting measurable physical phenomena, wrote Dr. Reed. Shadows is not responding to hallucinations or imagination. He is detecting real and quantifiable changes in the physical environment. But perhaps the most important discovery was accidental. During one of the monitoring sessions, Dr. Chen noticed that Emily was also being affected by the same fields that shadows detected. When instruments registered electromagnetic anomalies and shadows showed unusual behavior, Emily consistently reported physical sensations, temperature changes, sensation of presence, even alterations in her emotional state. Emily is developing sensitivity to the same phenomena that shadows detects naturally, observed Dr. Chen. It's as if prolonged exposure to these fields is training her nervous system to detect them. It was 1987. And Emily Watson, a psychiatrist trained in rigorous scientific methodology, had scientifically documented something that challenged all her education. Cats can detect phenomena that exist at the boundary between the physical world and something more, something that was about to become much more personal. September 1987, 3 years after adopting shadows, 2 years after beginning her scientific experiments, Dr. Emily Watson was about to discover that being guardian to a psychic cat meant much more than just observing his extraordinary abilities. On the morning of September 15th, Emily woke with a strange sensation. Shadows was not in his usual position at the foot of the bed. Instead, she found him sitting in the corner chair of the room, the same chair where he had growled at an invisible presence 3 years before, on the night of Mrs. Chun's death. But this time, Shadows wasn't growling, he was purring. A deep, continuous purr that Emily had never heard before. And he was looking directly at her with an intensity that made her feel as if he were trying to communicate something urgent. "What is it, Shadows?" Emily asked. Approaching the chair, Shadows jumped from the chair and walked to the window overlooking the building's courtyard. He placed his front paws on the windowsill and began to meow, not a common meow, but an almost musical sound, as if he were singing. Emily looked out the window. The courtyard was empty. It was 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, too early for any activity. But Shadows continued singing to something in the courtyard that she couldn't see. Then Emily felt it. The same inexplicable chill she had experienced 3 years before. The air became dense, charged, and she knew, with a certainty she couldn't explain scientifically, that she was not alone in the apartment. "Who's here?" Emily asked aloud, feeling ridiculous but unable to ignore the sensation. Shadows stopped meowing and turned to look at Emily. Then he did something that left her speechless. He walked to her, placed a paw on her leg, and began guiding her through the house. First to the kitchen, where he stopped beside the table and looked up, as if he were observing someone sitting there. Then to the living room, where he positioned himself next to the sofa and began purring again. Finally, back to the bedroom, where he sat at the foot of the bed and looked alternately at Emily and at a specific point near the window. "Shadows," Emily said softly, "who came to visit us?" As if in response, Emily felt a warm, familiar presence. A sensation of unconditional love that she hadn't experienced in years. And suddenly she knew who was there. "Dad?" She whispered. Dr. David Watson had died 2 years earlier, in October 1985, from a sudden heart attack. Emily had been so absorbed in her work and research that she hadn't completely processed her grief over the loss. She had buried herself in work, using science as a way to avoid feelings she found too difficult to face. Shadows approached Emily and began rubbing against her legs, purring with an intensity that made her whole body vibrate. And through that purring, Emily somehow heard a message, not in words, but in feelings, images, understandings that appeared directly in her mind. Her father was well. He was in a place of peace. He was proud of the work she was doing, especially her research with shadows. And he wanted her to know that the love between them hadn't ended with his physical death. Emily began to cry, the first tears she had shed since her father's funeral. She knelt on the floor and held Shadows, who continued purring like an engine of comfort. For 15 minutes, Emily remained there, crying years of repressed pain while Shadows served as a conductor between her and her father's presence. Gradually, the sensation of presence began to diminish, but left Emily with a sense of peace and resolution that she hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," she whispered, not knowing if she was speaking to Shadows or to her father, or to both. That experience fundamentally changed Emily's relationship with her work. She realized she had been studying Shadows and his abilities from a purely scientific perspective, treating spiritual phenomena as academic curiosities. Now she understood she was dealing with something deeply personal and sacred. In the following days, Emily began to notice changes in herself. Her sensitivity to the same phenomena that Shadows detected was rapidly increasing. She began to feel presences before Shadows even reacted to them. She began having vivid dreams about hospital patients, dreams that frequently contained information she couldn't possibly know consciously. In October 1987, Emily had her first precognitive dream. She dreamed of a young woman, approximately 25 years old, curly blonde hair, wearing a red sweater. In the dream, the woman was in a hospital room, crying and repeating, "I just wanted to see her one more time. Just one more time." Emily woke with the dream so vivid she could remember every detail of the woman's face. She drew a sketch in her diary and dated the entry, October 8, 1987. 3 days later, a young woman named Lisa Morrison was admitted to Pacific State Hospital after a suicide attempt. Lisa was exactly 25 years old, had curly blonde hair, and was wearing a red sweater when she arrived. Emily recognized her immediately from the dream. During the initial evaluation session, Lisa revealed that she had attempted suicide after her mother's sudden death in a car accident. "I just wanted to see her one more time," Lisa cried, using exactly the same words from Emily's dream. Just one more time. Emily remained silent for a moment, then made a decision that violated all conventional medical protocols. "Lisa," she said gently, "what if I told you there's a possibility you could connect with your mother again?" Lisa looked at Emily with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "What do you mean?" Emily explained about Shadows and his abilities, about her own recent experience with her father, about the possibility she had scientifically documented. She offered Lisa the opportunity to participate in a supervised session where Shadows could potentially facilitate some kind of connection. Lisa agreed immediately. That afternoon, Emily brought Shadows to Lisa's room. The cat immediately went to Lisa and jumped on her bed, beginning to purr intensely. Lisa began petting Shadows, and within minutes was crying, but not tears of despair. Tears of relief. "She's here," Lisa whispered. "My mother is here. I can feel her," Emily observed while Lisa seemed to have a silent conversation, mediated by Shadow's continuous purring. Lisa asked questions in a low voice, then remained silent as if listening to answers. Occasionally she smiled through her tears. The session lasted an hour. When it ended, Lisa was visibly transformed. The suicidal despair had been replaced by a sense of peace and purpose. She told me she's okay. Lisa explained to Emily. She said the accident wasn't anyone's fault, that I need to stop blaming myself. And she said she'd always be with me, that death didn't end our love. Lisa Morrison recovered completely. She never attempted suicide again, completed her treatment in 6 weeks instead of the typical 6 months for similar cases, and returned home to rebuild her life. But the experience left Emily with a disturbing understanding. She was changing. Shadow's abilities were transferring to her, and she didn't know how to control or fully understand what was happening. In November 1987, Emily began having even more intense experiences. She began seeing visitors on her own, without shadows. As an intermediary, shadows in hospital corridors, translucent figures in patients' rooms, presences that seemed aware that she could see them. The most intense experience happened on a Friday night when Emily was working alone at the hospital. She was reviewing medical records in her office when she felt a familiar presence. She looked up and saw her maternal grandmother, Margaret O'Sullivan, sitting in the chair across from her desk. Margaret had died when Emily was 12, but she recognized her immediately. Her grandmother looked exactly as Emily remembered, but translucent, as if made of silver light. "Grandma?" Emily whispered. Margaret smiled, the same warm smile Emily remembered from childhood. Then she spoke, and Emily heard her voice clearly. "Emily dear, you have been chosen for a very special job. Shadows is your guide, but you are becoming a guardian in your own right." "Guardian of what?" "Of the bridge between worlds. There are many people lost, both living and dead. They need someone who can help them find their way. You and Shadows are that bridge." Margaret's apparition began to fade. "Remember, dear, love is the only force that transcends death. Use this knowledge to heal." And then she disappeared, leaving Emily alone with the understanding that her life had changed forever. She was no longer just a psychiatrist who studied paranormal phenomena. She had become part of those phenomena. December 1987. Dr. Emily Watson had accepted her new reality. She was becoming a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, with Shadows as her guide and partner in this extraordinary journey. What she didn't expect was that this ability would completely transform her medical practice and make Pacific State Hospital a place where miracles began to happen regularly. The first significant transformation came through a patient named Thomas Brennan, a 42-year-old Vietnam War veteran who suffered from severe PTSD and suicidal depression. Thomas had been hospitalized for 8 months, resisting all forms of conventional therapy. He spent his days in silence, staring at the wall, reliving war traumas that had tormented him for 2 decades. One December morning, Emily found Shadows in Thomas's room, sitting beside the veteran's bed. Thomas was petting the cat, the first time Emily had seen him interact with anything or anyone since his admission. "He understands," Thomas said when he saw Emily. "The cat understands what it's like to carry the dead with you." Emily approached carefully. "What do you mean, Thomas?" "They're all here," Thomas replied, still petting Shadows. "My comrades who died in Vietnam. They're all in the room with me. The cat can see them too." Instead of treating this as a hallucination, Emily decided to explore. "Can you tell me about them?" For the next hour, Thomas told stories about 7 soldiers who had died in his unit. He spoke about each one, their personalities, their families, their dreams. And while he spoke, Shadows remained beside him, purring softly. "They want me to stop carrying guilt," Thomas said eventually. "They say it wasn't my fault they died and I survived. They say it's time to live for their memory, not die for it." That session marked the beginning of Thomas's recovery. In the following days, he began participating in group activities, eating regularly, talking with other patients. In 6 weeks, he was discharged, completely transformed. "Shadows helped me make peace with my dead," Thomas explained to Emily on the day of his release. Now I can honor them by living, instead of dying slowly for them. Thomas's story spread among hospital staff, and Emily began receiving requests from other doctors to try her approach, with patients considered lost cases. The second extraordinary case was Martha Rodriguez, a 68-year-old woman with advanced dementia who had stopped speaking or recognizing family members 6 months earlier. Her daughter, Carmen, visited daily, pleading for any sign of recognition that never came. Emily brought Shadows to meet Martha on a January 1988 afternoon. The cat immediately jumped on Martha's bed and snuggled beside her. Martha, who hadn't reacted to anything for months, automatically began petting Shadows. "Pretty kitty," Martha murmured, the first word she had spoken in 6 months. Carmen, who was visiting, began to cry. "Mom, do you recognize me?" Martha looked at Carmen through Shadow's eyes, as if the cat were serving as a lens that allowed her to see through the fog of dementia. "Carmen, my daughter, you came to visit me." For the rest of the afternoon, Martha had moments of complete clarity. She asked about grandchildren, remembered stories from Carmen's childhood, even made jokes. Always with Shadows at her side, always petting the cat as if he were an anchor to lucidity. "How is this possible?" Carmen asked Emily. "I don't know," Emily replied honestly. "But Shadows seems capable of penetrating barriers that conventional medicine can't overcome." Martha had 4 more sessions with Shadows over 2 months. Each session resulted in hours of mental clarity, allowing her to connect with her family in ways that seemed impossible. When Martha finally passed away in March 1988, it was peacefully conscious, saying goodbye to each family member, with Shadows purring at her side. The third case was the most extraordinary of all. In February 1988, an 8-year-old child named Michael Chun was admitted after suffering severe brain damage in a car accident that killed his parents. Michael was in a catatonic state, conscious but completely unresponsive. Doctors had determined the damage was irreversible. Michael's aunt, Jennifer Chun, begged Emily to try anything. "He's all that's left of my family," she cried. "If there's any chance..." Single quotes. Emily brought Shadows to meet Michael on a Tuesday morning. The boy was sitting in a chair, staring fixedly at nothing, as he had been doing for weeks. Shadows approached Michael and did something that surprised Emily. Instead of purring or snuggling, the cat began to play. He brought small objects to Michael: a pencil, a paper ball, a string. He placed these objects in Michael's motionless hands and then gently pushed them, as if trying to engage the boy in simple games. For 2 hours, Shadows persisted in this play therapy, and then something happened that left Emily speechless. Michael moved his hand. Just a small movement, almost imperceptible, but he grasped the string that Shadows had placed in his palm. "Michael?" Emily approached carefully. Michael looked at Shadows, then at Emily. His eyes, which had been empty for weeks, showed a spark of consciousness. "Kitty," Michael whispered. That was the first word Michael spoke since the accident. In the following days, working with Shadows, Michael began showing progressive signs of recovery. He started speaking in simple sentences, responding to basic questions, showing emotions. Michael's recovery was slow but steady. After 3 months of feline therapy, he was speaking normally, walking, and showing personality. Doctors called it an inexplicable, miraculous recovery. Shadows literally brought that boy back from the dead. Jennifer Chun told Emily, "I don't know how to thank you." In April 1988, Emily realized something extraordinary was happening at Pacific State Hospital. Patients who came specifically to work with her and Shadows showed recovery rates that defied all medical statistics. Dr. Harrison Webb, the hospital's medical director, called her for a meeting. "Emily, I need to understand what's happening. Your recovery rates are statistically impossible. Patients that other doctors consider lost are having complete recoveries. How?" Emily explained her approach, integrating Shadows into therapeutic sessions. her openness to phenomena that conventional medicine didn't recognize, her willingness to treat patients' paranormal experiences as potentially valid. "This isn't medicine," Dr. Webb protested. "I don't know what this is. It's expanded medicine," Emily replied. "I'm treating not just patients' physical and psychological symptoms, but also their spiritual needs. And the results speak for themselves." Dr. Webb couldn't argue with the results. In 6 months, Emily's recovery rates had risen to 87% compared to the hospital average of 34%. Patients traveled from other states specifically to work with the miracle cat doctor. In June 1988, Emily received a call that would change her career again. "Dr. Watson? This is Dr. Patricia Goldman from Harvard Medical School. I've heard about your work with animal-assisted therapy. I'd like to offer you a position here in Boston to establish an official research program." Emily looked at Shadows, who was sleeping peacefully in a patch of sunlight in her office. "Dr. Goldman, with all respect, my work isn't exactly conventional animal-assisted therapy. We know that. That's why we're interested. We want to study what you're doing, scientifically document your methods and results. If we can replicate your successes, ... single quotes." Emily considered the offer. Harvard meant resources, credibility, the opportunity to train other doctors in her techniques. But it also meant leaving Pacific State Hospital, the place where she had discovered her true calling. "Can I bring Shadows?" she asked. "Of course. In fact, we insist." In August 1988, Dr. Emily Watson moved to Boston to establish the Center for Integrative Medicine at Harvard Medical School. Shadows traveled with her in his own special carrier as official co-founder of the program. But leaving Pacific State Hospital wasn't easy. On the morning of her departure, Emily took one last walk through the corridors where she had discovered her extraordinary abilities. In the corridor where Shadows used to conduct his weekly vigils at J. Morrison's grave, Emily found a small plaque that staff had installed in memory of the spirits who found peace through the compassion of Dr. Emily Watson and Shadows. Emily knelt and petted Shadows. "Ready for a new adventure, partner?" Shadows meowed once, a sound Emily had learned to interpret as yes, and they departed for Boston, where they would establish a program that would forever change the practice of integrative medicine. The Center for Integrative Medicine at Harvard Medical School, co-founded by Dr. Emily Watson and Shadows in 1988, became one of the world's most respected research programs at the intersection between conventional medicine and phenomena that defy traditional scientific explanation. During her 15 years at Harvard, Emily trained over 200 doctors in techniques that integrated extraordinary animal sensitivities with conventional medical practices. Shadows, now officially recognized as senior feline consultant, worked with over 3,000 patients, maintaining a success rate that remains statistically inexplicable. In 1995, Emily published her revolutionary book, The Healing Bridge: How Animals Guide Us Between Worlds, which became an international bestseller and established a new field of academic study. The book meticulously documented 15 years of cases, including rigorous scientific data that proved the effectiveness of methods that mainstream medicine still considered controversial. Emily and Shadows' work attracted the attention of researchers around the world. Dr. Takeshi Yamamoto, from the University of Tokyo, established a similar program using Japanese cats descended from Shinto temples. Dr. Marie Dubois, from the Sorbonne, initiated research with cats in Parisian hospitals. Dr. Kumar Patel, in New Delhi, documented similar abilities in cats associated with traditional ASHR aims. The global network of integrative feline medicine grew to include 47 centers in 23 countries, all based on the pioneering model established by Emily and Shadows. But perhaps the most important legacy was personal. In 1998, at age 53, Emily decided to adopt a second cat. an orange-haired female she found abandoned in Harvard's gardens. The cat, whom Emily named Aurora, showed abilities that perfectly complemented Shadows. Wow! Shadows was a specialist in detecting spiritual presences and facilitating communication with the deceased. Aurora demonstrated an extraordinary capacity to detect physical diseases before symptoms appeared. She saved at least a dozen lives by identifying cancers, heart problems, and brain aneurysms in stages so early that conventional medical exams hadn't yet detected them. Working together, Shadows and Aurora created a form of truly holistic medicine, treating body, mind, and spirit as interconnected aspects of a single system. In 2003, Shadows, now 19 years old, began showing signs of advanced age. Emily knew their extraordinary partnership was coming to an end. During his final months, Shadows did something that deeply touched Emily. He began training Aurora in his spiritual abilities. Emily watched fascinated as the older cat guided the younger one through hospital corridors, showing her where to focus attention, how to react to different types of presences. "He's passing the torch," Emily wrote in her diary. Shadows knows his work here is almost complete, and he's ensuring that Aurora can continue the mission. On the morning of December 15, 2003, Emily found Shadows in his favorite position, sitting at his office window, observing the garden where so many patients had found peace over the years. But this time, Shadows wasn't alone. Emily saw, clearly without doubt, two translucent figures beside Shadows. One was her father, Dr. David Watson. The other was an elderly woman Emily recognized from family photos, her Irish great-grandmother. "Bridget O'Connor, is it time?" Emily asked softly. Shadows looked at Emily one last time, purred gently, then closed his eyes peacefully. He died as he had lived, with dignity, purpose, and surrounded by love. But the story didn't end with Shadow's death. Aurora assumed the principal role at the center, developing abilities that even surpassed Shadow's. More importantly, she began training a new generation of therapeutic cats, direct descendants of Shadows who seemed to inherit his extraordinary capabilities. In 2010, Emily established the Shadows Foundation, an international organization dedicated to training animals and healthcare professionals in integrative medicine techniques. The foundation maintains training centers on every continent, preserving and expanding the pioneering work initiated by a black cat rescued from a storm drain in 1984. Today, in 2025, Dr. Emily Watson, now 80 years old, continues active as Director Emerita of the Shadows Foundation. Aurora, at 27, remains at her side as a faithful companion and wise counselor. "People frequently ask me if I believe Shadows is still with me," Emily said in a recent interview. "My answer is always the same. Believing implies doubt. I don't believe Shadows is still here. I know, because love transcends physical death, and our connection was based on love." The Center for Integrative Medicine at Harvard has treated over 50,000 patients since its founding. The techniques developed by Emily and Shadows are now taught in 127 medical schools around the world. Over 2,000 cats trained in methods based on Shadows' work are currently working in hospitals, hospices, and treatment centers globally. But perhaps the most lasting legacy is the change in medical perception itself about the nature of healing. Through her work with Shadows, Emily proved that truly effective medicine must treat not just the physical body, but also patients' emotional and spiritual needs. "Shadows taught me that we are much more than flesh and bones," Emily reflects. "We are spiritual beings having a physical experience. And when we treat people from this holistic perspective, healing miracles become not just possible, but inevitable." In the next episode of Animal Soul, we'll explore another extraordinary guardian, dogs that can detect the future. You'll discover the story of Rex, a golden retriever who saved hundreds of lives by predicting the devastating 1989 San Francisco earthquake. But before we part, remember what Shadows taught us. The animals in our lives are not just companions. They are teachers, guides, and bridges to aspects of reality we are still learning to understand. The next time your cat looks at an empty corner of the room, the next time he reacts to something you can't see, remember Shadow's story, perhaps. He's seeing something you should pay attention to as well.